Timothy Cox Will Not Change His Socks by Robert Kinerk and Stephen Gamble. What would happen, I wonder, said Timothy Cox, if I went a whole month without changing my socks? I imagine, his dog said, a dachshund named Walt, that sooner or later some folks would find fault. True, said Timmy said, there are some I'd offend. That shouldn't deter me, though. Should it, old friend? For you know very well, Walter, I'm the type who gets an idea and follows it through. Tim dressed the next morning and slicked down his hair. Then he put on his socks, the very same pair he'd removed from his feet the evening before. Day one, he told Walt as he walked out the door. His mother and father watched Timmy walk off. They quietly said, There's some who might scoff. Our boy, we believe, is the best ever seen. He's courteous, beautiful, brilliant, and clean. Tim rushed to his classroom and sat in a seat. Did anybody notice the smell from his feet? A few of his neighbors cast glances around. Miss Claypool, his teacher, stopped speaking and frowned. That was it, no more. There was no one who yelled, "What does that stink? It's the worst I've smelled." Timmy's socks the next morning smelled slightly like glue. To his dachshund when leaving, Tim said, "It's day 2, and nobody said that they smell something strange." Said the dog with a frown, "Well, I'm sure that will change." The next day, Timmy sat with his hands on his desk, knowing the smell was a bit more grotesque. All the windows around him flew up. Before noon, Miss Claypool taught on, but she looked like she'd swoon. Pupils wrinkled their nose, and just as the bell a few of them asked, "What on earth is that smell?" A registered letter came early the next day. It was brief, it was blunt, and it had this to say: Timothy Cox, won't you consider please changing your socks? Your friends and your neighbors are getting fed up. And it's only day 3, Timmy said to his pup. That night Timmy went with his eyes as bright as lamps. Next day his whole class on their noses wore clamps. Into the classroom strode Principal Plum, with his nostrils squeezed shut by his finger and thumb. He let Timothy know, in hygienic prose, that his socks were an insult to everyone's nose. "In conclusion, my boy," he harumphed, "I must say that if you don't change your socks, you must stay away." He gave Timmy books and a long reading list, so when he'd come back, there'd be nothing he'd missed. Day 4, and the word spread. It traveled for blocks. There's someone around here who won't change his socks. To the door of Timmy's house came a neighbor, Miss Spear. To Timothy's parents she whispered, "I fear someone you may love have not changed his socks. Have you checked on your dear little Tim, Miss Cox?" Tim's mother just laughed, and his dad said, "It's clear you don't know our Timmy like we do, Miss Spear. Our son's the most perfect young man we've ever seen. Athletic, witty, good-natured, and clean. Timothy Cox, won't you please consider changing your socks?" That was written on signs that the neighbors put up. And it's only day 6, Timmy said to his pup. The Board of Health officers called Timmy's father, and they told him, "Your son is becoming a bother. He's healthy, he's hardy, he's strong as an ox, and he ought to be ordered to change his darn socks." Tim's father replied in a courteous way, "If you really knew Timmy, that's not what you'd say. Let me send you a photo and show you what I mean. My Timmy's a genteel artist and clean." That night in his bed, with his blankets pulled high, Tim said to his dachshund, "2 weeks have gone by." "Yes," said the dog, "and those socks you're wearing smell worse than a box of overripe herring. By now you should know, or at least what I think, what happens to a boy who wears stockings that stink. And I'd like to suggest, as your pet, as your friend, that it's time for this effort you're making to end." "A month is a month," Timmy said to his dog. With that he rolled over and slept like a log, while Walter gazed at the sky, which was very fast, and he prayed that the month would go by very fast. A sheriff arrived on the horse next day, and he was careful to stay several houses away from his horse, which was mouthing was a single word. "Phew!" he shouted to Tim. "I have orders for you. We passed a new law. Here it is written down. No stinky socks may be worn in this town. So Timothy Cox, won't you please consider changing your socks." Then, holding his nose, he exclaimed, "Giddy up!" "And it's just 15 days, Timmy said to his pup. The gripes and the complaints, in what seemed like a barrage, poured in until his parents said, "Tim, the garage, though you may be a wonderful son in all ways, might as well be the place you stay for a few days." Inside the garage, Timmy set up camp, with a cooler, a cot, his books, and a lamp. He was eating a peach when he heard someone yell, "Let's try to play, Tim, despite that bad smell." Outside were his neighbors, Art, June, and Pierre. Art was holding his nose, June was fanning the air, and Pierre, oh, poor Pierre, he had practically fainted. "The air!" he was gasping. "The air, Tim! It's tainted!" A panicky rabbit ran right past a cop, who turned on his siren and forced him to stop, and was telling him sternly, "Your speed is unlawful," when the rabbit said, "Sir, don't you smell something awful?" The officer lifted his nose for a sniff. He gagged and he choked at the very first whiff. He phoned in the news to the guy at the station, and they sent out copters with this declaration: "Timothy, Timothy, Timothy Cox, won't you consider, please, changing your socks?" The copter's propellers went whoop, 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 whoop. "Day 20 already," said Tim to his pup. Next morning the fire department with hoses came riding their engines and holding their noses. They hopped down at once and they started to spray. Poor Timmy and Walt had to scamper away, down to a path into the woods, up and over a hill, wilting flowers and plants with a stench of Tim's socks. Tim circled around the trucks in pursuit and hurried back home by a quick, different route. At his house, Timmy found a brief note on the gate. "Your mother and I," wrote his dad, "hesitate to find any fault with the way that you smell. But, Timmy, we think it would be just as well if you moved all your stuff to..." He signed it, "Your father, your best, truest friend. P.S. The farthest, the most extreme end." And in his scrawl, his dad added, "P.P.S. My son, your homework's a thing. We'll assume you get done." Walter helped Timothy move out his stuff, saying wearily, "Timmy, enough is enough. Haven't you proved what you've wanted to prove? How far from the house must your folks make you move?" "Faithful dog," Timmy said. "As you know, I'm the kind who follows things through once he's made up his mind. I will not be discouraged. I won't be deterred. And that, my dear Walter, is my final word." Walter was helping Tim carry his cot, and it can't be repeated, the things that the dog thought. Tim, with his hat and his food and his dog, found the spot by the fence. It was nearly a bog. There were various grasses and various clumps, mosquitoes and blue flies, green flies and stumps, and a skunk who was grinning as hard as he could. "Gosh," he said to Timmy, "you smell really good." All through the night there was a racket, of course, from loudspeaker trucks that came out in force to drive every road, every lane, every street with a warning. Timmy concerning his feet. "Timothy, Timothy, Timothy Cox, won't you consider, please, changing your socks? You've only been yelled at and chased. You ought to give up. Only 3 days to go," Tim exclaimed to his pup. The next day came and went with a temperature freezing. Walt shivered. Tim shook, and the skunk started sneezing. They tried to warm up with some running and stretching. What gripes from the neighborhood, though! What a kvetching! People were gagging and they shouted, "We're sick! You need to change those socks, and you must do it quick." "Pay no attention," Tim said to his friends. "There's only 2 days remaining until this thing ends." Scouts the next day from the fringes of trees spelled out with their flags, "Timmy, change your socks, please." Judges banged gavels and referees whistled. The governor glowered. His honor guard bristled. Even the skunk, their new friend, had to quit. "Your smell," he told Timmy, "I have to admit, though by nature I'm the one who's reluctant to nag, at moments has made me even want to gag." He shook hands with Walter and Timmy, and then as the sun slowly set, he went home to his den. The sinking sun tinted the arching vault as Tim shared his thoughts with his faithful dog Walt. "Almost a month has gone by to the day, and I do regret what I've done, Walt." "No way! I'd do it again, and you know I would too." Walter replied very coldly, "Not true." The whole month, it ended at dawn. Tim pulled off his stockings he'd first put on a full month before. A full month to the day, and Walter, who watched them, said weakly, "Hooray! Timothy, Timothy, Timothy Cox, at last you've changed those abominable socks. You followed things through as the way you said back then. But please, Timmy, Don't ever do it again. In a case full of trophies, which no one unlocks, the school still displays Timmy's raggedy socks, with a sign that declares Timmy followed things through, and others might think about doing that too. Timmy himself, if you look him up, will tell you the same, till a nudge from his pup reminds him to say what he now knows is true. Though it's right, and it's good if you follow things through, on some sort of silly or trivial mission, the wise thing to do is to think and to plan, which I didn't do, but I'm sure that you can. The end.